So in case it wasn't totally clear, one of the concepts I was trying to get across was the idea of, working with patterns, flat pattern making, and you can kind of see how that would relate to a map, flat map, and also just, it's a lot to try to explain, so I'm trying to say things in the most simplest terms of people that would not know anything about flat pattern. But it's just, instead of draping, and you have your basic ease that is required, to fit any body, basically. And you just move that around, and you can add to it, or do different things to it, make it into pleats, a dart to pleats, or a dart to gathers, or a dart to a seam, or whatever it is. But that's the amount that at very least needs to be incorporated. And so it's just that idea of overlapping areas where there needs to be fitting in terms of space-time fabric, and how that would translate, I guess, into the grand scale cosmos of things. But another thing that you do when you are flat pattern making, and there are programs to do it on the computer, which is 1,000 times easier, but you still have to learn so you know what you're doing when you're on there. And you have to walk the pattern pieces so that you know each seam that is supposed to connect, that they are the exact same length. And so there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I would always just do it against a window or some sort of light source behind, so that you just overlap the two pattern pieces at the lines that would match up, and you slowly sort of walk it, especially if it's a curved line where it's harder to measure. You have to make sure that both those curves are exactly the same length, and so you walk them, and you just sort of move them along as you would a ruler if you were trying to measure that curve. But as long as they all match up and all come to right angles at each corner, even if it's a 1/16 of an inch, it still has to be a right angle, so things connect. So you can see how that again overlaps with the idea of the tesseract and the right angles to each other, but the fourth dimension being a different angle in and of itself than those right angles. So you can kind of see through pattern making how all those concepts overlap, and the idea of the expanding universe. And there is that one tutorial that's on a few playlists that shows how you grade a pattern, and grading means to once you've made gotten the pattern completely correct and how you want it, in order for it to fit different sizes, there are certain areas along the pattern piece that need to be increased to fit different bust sizes or hip sizes or whatnot. And so for each pattern piece, you can see different lines. That's when you buy a pattern at a fabric store, and you pick between 4 sizes and you cut along those. That's what you do on a computer program to manually grade a pattern piece in order for it to come in different sizes and be produced in different sizes. And so you can kind of relate that to an expanding universe. But anyways, oh no, they don't have a stop sign. And so going back quickly to the idea of walking a pattern, and that also overlaps with the Carl Sagan video of jumping into a new dimension, wanting to interact with whatever is within that flatland space, flat patterns, jumping into the pattern, and walking it yourself in a way, as a metaphor, walking life, walking in the shoes of, metaphor, different scales of things, but there's the literal sense of walking a pattern, and then there's the idea of the pattern as if pattern is Earth, world, our reality, and the maker of that pattern jumping in to walk it, to try to make sure, test it out in a way. And that relates to the Chanel show. I think it's 2015 Couture show or something. It's on, I think, the most recent playlist with all the dots and different levels, and so you can kind of then see how the data plays overlap there. And it's, you know, all these different scales of things. The data plays are like the cosmos, but then scaled very, you know, zoom in and it represents a single day, a dot, and then within that Couture show it's like jumping into that data play and seeing, testing it, walking out the pattern, making sure everything lines up, and you know, seeing how things are and measurements and things like that, like space-time ripples, and then the Chanel show is a visual representation of that, jumping into a data play and walking in between of those dots, except some of the data plays actually represent the midpoints and some of them represent, the smaller dots are ones that represent like all 365 days and all the different components, and then the larger dots are either something that a certain date that was called out, a certain number, or anything, and or midpoints. And midpoints are different than when two signs mix as far as astrology goes, by the way. Like, I know that Sagittarius and Leo, because I have like a lot of planets in Sagittarius, in the 5th house, and just depending on houses, systems, like Scorpio or Leo, but the 5th house is of creativity. So I always wondered what like Sagittarius and Leo, and that makes Libra, air. And so there's a lot of thought that goes into behind reflecting the fire. And so it's like when two of the same signs make something, but midpoints are similar, but if you're doing the astrology chart, I'll have to explain it in another video because I'm a little bit too distracted trying to get somewhere. But I hope that makes sense, and that idea of jumping into the pattern, jumping into the data, jumping into, I guess, sort of like the Matrix, or jumping into whatever it is that you've created in order to test it out, to walk the pattern, and then I love the walk it like I talk it, you know. Just songs about pattern making. It's like fashion school humor. Okay, anyways, hope that makes sense, and hope that brings more depth to all of these recent playlists and connections and makes some further bridges for you. All right, bye.